Alrighty, in this video what we're going to do is talk about constructor functions. Alright, so let's go ahead and comment out this, this example that's breaking our code here, and let's pop open example 5. So what is a constructor function? Well, a constructor function in JavaScript is actually every function. Every function is a constructor function. We refer to particular functions as constructor functions based off of how we expect them to be used, not necessarily the syntax that we use to define them. So for example, I could write an add left, right, and it'll, I don't know, console log left, or whoops, left plus, come on, you can do it. Left plus right plus equals plus left plus right. So we have a basic add function, right? And it does what we expect it to. But this can be used as a constructor function. So what really makes a function a constructor function? Again, it's not how it's defined, it's how it's used. And what makes something a constructor function is when we use the new keyword. So I can say something like var ble equals new add 1 plus 2. And funny enough, that's perfectly valid to do. So what does the new keyword actually accomplish? Well, let's go ahead and create our person. Let's go ahead and say function person. And what I'm going to do is this is a stylistic thing that I do with my naming of constructor functions. If I intend for a function to be a constructor function, I capitalize the first letter. So person is capitalized because I intend it to be a constructor function. We'll do person name, and then I'll do this dot name equals name, and this dot say hi equals function console log hey plus name, right? So we can of course invoke this function directly. What do you think? What do you think will happen if I did person var person equals person Nelson? What do you think is going to happen here? Just based off of your understanding of what this keyword does. Remember, we're not in strict mode. That's a hint there. And based off of what you expect the return value to be, what do you think the output will be? What do you think console log person will be? What do you think person.sayHi will do? So think about that for a moment. I'm going to hit Control S. And so that's interesting. We get an undefined, which is the result of doing console log person. So this person variable is undefined, and then we get uncaught type error, cannot read property say hi of undefined, because we're trying to access this function of this person object. So what really happened? Well, we invoked a function, just a straight up normal function, with a parameter, and then it executed. And it executed under what context? Remember, what happens if we don't supply a context to a function call in loose mode and in not strict mode? Well, we execute the function in terms of the global context, meaning we've just polluted the window object with the name property and a say hi function. I can prove it. I can type in window.name. I can even just type in name when we get Nelson. I can say hi, and it says hey Nelson. So we've literally polluted the global namespace by doing this. And so this isn't what you're going to want to do. Now, of course, we could have, instead of doing the this dot and all that nonsense, we could have returned an object. I think we saw an example of that earlier, where we did our drag drop list, where we just had a normal function and it returned an object. That worked just fine because we weren't using the this keyword. But let's go ahead and see how this exact code, I'll comment it out up here so we can compare it, how this exact code will behave if I instead did person equals new person Nelson. And then I did console log person, and then person.sayHi. What do you think the output will be here? Because now we're using this function as a constructor function, because we're using the new keyword. Let's hit Control S. Now we get what we expected. The object is an object with a name and a say hi, and it has a prototype of type object, right? Well, actually a prototype of the function person, which then has a prototype of the object. We'll talk about that here in a moment. So if you're confused as to how the prototype is a different thing than what you'd expected it to be, we'll talk about that. But we see hey Nelson. So say hi does work. It says hi on that proper object. So what is going on here? Well, the new keyword does some interesting things. And I'm going to actually write out in code what the new keyword does. But what I first want to do is change this code a little bit. Because right here, we have the exact same problem that we had before, where every time we instantiate a new person, every time we call a new person, we're getting a new instance of the say hi function, which is not very memory efficient, especially if you're creating many, many objects. But it turns out that functions have prototypes. And I don't mean functions have object prototypes, because they do, because functions are objects. I can say person dot underscore proto, and that is going to be the function prototype, which we can expect. Actually, this might hopefully make some sense here. I'm going to go ahead and add a watch variable for the person function. And we can do person, and we can look at proto, and look at this. Some things here should look a little familiar. The prototype of the person function is the function prototype, which contains some familiar properties, such as apply. And call should be in here, and call, and bind. So now you see that functions have these methods on them that are acquired by the function prototype. And it's funny, we can go in circles too. I can open up call. Call is a function, which means its prototype is a function. Going into its prototype, we can go into call again, going into its prototype and call again, and going into and just go on and forever and forever and forever. Basically, you can do function.call.proto.call.proto and so on and so on. But the point is, though, that functions have prototypes. Functions have object prototypes. They have a proto keyword, but they have something else that is a completely different concept. They have what are called function prototypes. So we can look at that as well. I can open up my call here. Notice how it has the proto object, but it also has this prototype property. Now, this prototype property is not the same thing as this proto property. This proto property is the prototype of the function object. Every object in JavaScript has a proto property. We've discussed this, right? Even functions, because functions are objects. Functions are actual little bits of memory that have properties, and we've talked about that as well. So functions have an object prototype, but they also have a function prototype. Now, normal objects do not have this property. Only functions have this property. And this property is interesting because it changes the behavior of how the new keyword works. So let's say that I wanted to manipulate every single person that's instantiated with the new keyword on this constructor function. What I would do is I would do person.prototype.sayHi equals function, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this code from here. And then I'll remove that from there entirely. So what is the difference between the two methods? I'm gonna keep that old say hi in there, but I'm gonna comment it out. Right? All right. So it's commented out. Blah blah blah. And then over here we have our thing. So what is the difference between this and this? Well, functionally, there's not going to be one. In fact, our code is still going to work the exact same as it did before. But what's interesting is the difference between these two things, these two bits of syntax, is that this, and we'll talk about what the this is from the new keyword in a moment here. I know I haven't defined that yet. You might still be a little nebulous about that, but believe me, there is an explanation. It does make sense. But now we're talking about the prototype property. So in this context, we're attaching a new instance of a function, a new instance of a closure specifically because we're capturing the name. Oops, this should be this.name because that's no longer in scope. I can't access in these functions, I can't access the local variables of the constructor function. But anyway, we're creating a new closure every time we create a new person when we use this syntax. But this syntax only creates one instance of the sayHi function. And what's interesting is that if I went ahead and did, if I did it like, if I did this, let's reverse this for a second. And let's do our little demonstration of how JavaScript resolves properties. So I do person. Remember, person, this is the global object that I created right here in 124. If I did person, and we wanted to call sayHi, right? And that works. So what does the JavaScript engine do? It does person has own property say hi. Oh, that's true. Meaning we can just do person say hi dot call person, or just person say hi. Both would work, right? So in this instance, when we attach the function to every single instance of the object that's created with the new keyword, the has own property will return true, right? But let's go ahead and bring this second syntax back. And let's do the same thing. As you see, it still behaves the same. But the process behind the scenes is a little different, because it's going to do person.hasOwnProperty say hi, and look at that, it's false. This person object does not have a property called say hi. So why is this working? Well, let's do our little thing here. The next thing it's going to do is person.proto.hasOwnProperty say hi, and that's true. Wait a sec. So what we did was, we didn't add a say hi property to this person object. This person object literally just has a name, which is set right here on line 109. He does not have a say hi function, but his prototype does. So now we can start to see there is a relationship, even though they're not the same thing. There is a relationship between the constructor function prototype and the object prototype. So, how does new work? Well, let's go ahead and I'm going to write some pseudocode. I'm going to rewrite this person function, but I'm going to basically pretend that I'm new, as in the new keyword. The new keyword is going to do this. It's going to say var this equals empty object. This underscore underscore proto underscore underscore equals person.prototype. Then it's going to run the function, which is going to say this name equals name. So this is JS internals, and then our function. So that's what it does. In fact, I can't use the this keyword here because that's a reserved keyword. I am, however, going to go ahead and do that. And then finally, at the end of it, what it does is it returns the this. So when I call new person on this object, or on this constructor function, basically what happens are these internals. All right? But JavaScript will only do this if we use the new keyword. So again, when we use the new keyword, 3 things happen. First, JavaScript creates a new object. So JavaScript will instantiate a new object before even invoking person. Then it will bind that new object to the context or the this of the function. That's why this.name, when we use the new keyword, is an empty object. Whereas this.name, if we had no context, if we were just invoking person without the new keyword, would be the global context. Then it sets the prototype of that newly created object to the prototype property of the constructor function, which is a magic property that exists on every single function. Then, after that, it invokes whatever our constructor function does. And then finally, at the end, it returns that newly created object. And that's literally what new does. That's all new does. It just does that behind the scenes. So now we can kind of start to see how manipulating the this.proto isn't really necessary, because we can control the prototype of an object based off of the prototype. We can control the object prototype of an object based off of the function prototype of a constructor function. And it's, again, very unfortunate that that they're named the same thing. They're both prototypes, but they're not the same thing. Underscore underscore proto is the object prototype, which is used for name resolution. The function prototype, the actual prototype property called prototype, only exists on functions, and it's used to set the object prototype of an object that's created with a new keyword. So new, proto, and prototype are different concepts, but they're all related. New is how we change, or at least initialize, an object with a particular prototype. In fact, let me go ahead and comment this example out. In fact, let's go ahead and simulate the new keyword but not inside the function. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to try to do the same thing with the new keyword here. So I'm also going to collapse that code. Come on, collapse harder. There you go. Collapse that code so we get a little bit more room to type. So I'm going to simulate the new keyword entirely. So I'm going to say var person equals object. Person dot underscore underscore proto equals person dot proto. And then person dot call person. And I'm actually going to rename this person to person object. So it's clear where we're referring to the lowercase person object versus the uppercase constructor function. And this is basically what the new keyword does. So JavaScript creates a new object. It then sets the proto... Whoops. I made a mistake there. See, it's so easy to get confused. Then it sets the object prototype of the person object to the function prototype of the constructor function. Then it invokes the constructor function, but it changes the context of the this by basically the same mechanics as call. And I can prove it works. I can do person say hi, refresh, and person object say hi, and refresh, and it says hey undefined, because I didn't pass in a name to the constructor function. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now it says hey Nelson. So yeah, that is a function prototype. And we can add a bunch of different, we can add any properties we want to function prototypes. Let's go ahead and this example is getting a little too long here, but blah. Oops, that's not going to work. Blah blah blah. Okay, I used too many multi-line comments there. So it's important to understand that a prototype is just an object, and by default, so if I did function, let's do person again, person name. If I went ahead and did person.prototype, we see that it's just an empty object. Now, it's an empty object. It does have this constructor property. By the way, there is a constructor property on function prototypes, but that's not relevant to what we're going to be discussing. If you want to learn more about that, you can read the spec or check out Stack Overflow. The basic thing you need to understand is that the constructor property doesn't have much bearing on how things work. It's used internally in some frameworks, but basically, yeah, every time we create a function, that function has a prototype. Every function has a prototype. If I did function add, which isn't something that I would consider to be a constructor function, I can still do add.prototype. And what do I get? I get a new object. And this is just this is an empty object with a constructor and then a prototype of object. So add.prototype does not equal, so I'm going to try to equal these, or apply the equality operator. Add.prototype does not equal person.prototype. They're completely separate. But anyway, you can add any property you want to the prototype. I can do person prototype dot name or dot first name equals whoa, and then I can do var person equals new person bleh, which, by the way, I'm not setting this name to anything, by the way. And now I can do person. Now in my console window, I can do person dot first name. Now, person doesn't have that property. I can do has own property first name, and it's false. But person dot proto does, because person dot proto equals the constructor function's prototype. Or whoops, the constructor function's function prototype, not its object prototype. All right, so I think that wraps up so far. I have a little bit more to talk about with function prototypes. And if you're still kind of confused, I encourage you to start typing this example code out, and or just keep watching, because we're going to talk about some more interesting things we can do with prototypes in the coming videos and different ways we can manipulate them. And with that, we'll see you guys in the next video.